Hi and welcome to Plastic Models by a Regular Dude. Today I am going to talk a little bit about my entry into the Joe's T34 group build. And my entry is the Dragon OT3476 model 1943 number 112 factory smart kit. I have not built a T34 since late 80s. And that was the Tamiya T3476, so this will be a little bit different. Never built a Dragon T34 kit before, so let's take a look. Alright, here is a quick note on some of the Dragon instruction stuff. So I'm currently working on step 2. I've got parts N1 and N2, which is the suspension parts, installed inside the tub. I've also got P30, 31, A5, got all those installed. Everything fits like a champ, blah blah blah. So here's the deal. Here's the front of the tank, and part C8 is supposed to go on the front of the lower hull tub. Now this part, I don't know if you can see in the video, but it has a taper on one side and it's flat on the other. Well, it doesn't tell you which way to orient the part, which way the part should be oriented. I don't know if that orient was right. But one would assume that the angled part would fit there. So me being a test fitter and stuff like that, I checked it. It's like, yeah, that looks pretty good. That fits really nice down below. But I thought, you know, just to make sure, I'm going to look further in the instructions and see how it's supposed to fit. So the part that connects to this, that's going to butt up against that, is part number C3, is what the instructions call for, which is this part right here. Alright, so I put it on there just to see, and there's kind of a gap. Well, not kind of a gap, there's a big gap. Okay, so I'm thinking, wow, okay, so is this supposed to fit the other way? So I flipped it around. So you have a big gap down there, but I thought, well, it's underneath, maybe it's supposed to be like that. So we put this on here like this, and you know, it fits a little bit better, but it doesn't fit snug. It's just weird. Something is amiss here. So it's like, all right, so let's go further in our test fitting, and let's see what the upper part is. So naturally, the upper hull fits on here thusly, fits like a champ, no problem. Okay, so you have this part up front. All right, so I again got the part, this part here, and I put it on here, and it's like, yeah, you know, with it flipped correctly, this bottom plate, the way I think it should go, it's like, all right, whatever, but there's still a gap. So that something's not right here. So I thought, okay, one more part to try. So I look at the front to see which part goes on the front. Now it is labeled L8. Okay. So a lot of times I look for parts visually. Okay. So you can see this part here is kind of a sharpened round curve at the top. It's not like a circle at the top. Okay, it goes up like that and down. It's got one notch here, one notch there. So I look on the deal and I find it, and I'm like, okay, well, that's showing part P1. So what's the deal there? So I went ahead and test fitted it like that. You know, it fits like it's supposed to. It's all right, you know, whatever. So I thought, all right, so let's see how that part fits on the front. Okay, it just doesn't look right. Okay, something is not working here. It's like this part right here is too small. All right, so I don't know, something's still wrong. So I look at the front, and part P1, which is this part here, is shown as a part that's not used on this kit. So I thought, okay, so let's take a look a little bit further. So I've found C6, which is the part where the flame projector fits. Okay, and I look at that, and it's like, wait a minute, there are 2 locating pins on the bottom and 1 on the top. So obviously that's not going to fit there. So I look further on the parts sprues, and here's another front plate, L8. L8 is the actual number that it shows here. Okay, so I put this on here. All right, that fits pretty cool. And it will fit this part here for the flame projector. Okay, and I also use the box art as kind of a guide as well, because that's supposed to be a decent representation of what the kit looks like, and it looks more like this here. Okay, so taking this part here, which is C3, I fit it on here, and it's just that's something's not right. It's just too much of a gap, top and bottom. That's a very, very poor fit. So I look further on the sprues in the box, and there is a part P27, which is this one. Now it's a little bit wider, and the angles here are a little bit more pronounced. Okay, you put that on there, and we're still, that's like too big. So, you know, what's the deal? So I looked again, and I'm going to have to assume that this is the part that fits on here. Now, with a little bit of clever trimming, looks like part of the problem might be the ends are catching on this part of the front hull. Okay, so right here I'm going to ever so slightly trim just a little bit, because it protrudes further than this and this. Okay, so I'm going to trim just ever so slightly on this part here to see if I can get it to fit flush, and I think that will correct the problem, because it fits pretty well along the front and along the bottom for the most part. Okay, I'm going to have to make sure I really seal that up good. I may have to do something about making some weld beads. Sorry, I hit the camera. Or something. So, you know, there's that. So, you know, in doing all that, I discovered that a couple of the numbers don't match, and I'm making notes on here, and if you're building this kit, take note that that's the situation. So in doing that, I also discovered something else, and this one's kind of a bummer, but it's not unsurmountable. Okay, so this plate goes here, which is great. It's pretty decent fit across the top, you know, with a liberal amount of cement and pressing in there really tight. I'll be able to get that to seal up to where it looks like, you know, there's a weld bead on the top but not on the bottom. So if I do it right, then it'll seal together and it'll look like a weld bead. It'll be fine. However, on the side here, as you can see, there's a pretty gnarly gap right here. Now some may think, oh, it's not too bad. Well, yeah, it is, because that's supposed to be flush and welded onto this side plate. So that looks pretty wonky, and that dog, as they say, that dog ain't gonna hunt. So I think what I'm gonna have to do, it just seems like this front plate is just too wide, completely too wide, but I'm gonna have to come up with something. So I think what I'm gonna do is I think I'm going to using some of this styrene here. That may be a bit thick, so I may have to sand it down, but I think I'm gonna glue a strip on there, make it as neat as possible to fill in this gap. This is pretty thin. This is pretty thin material here, so hopefully it will work. But I'm going to try and fill in that gap there. I'm going to cut a strip and stick it in there, test fit it, and make sure it doesn't just totally bow the thing up and make it look dumb. But I got to figure out something to fill that in, because I really don't want to have to fill it in with a bunch of putty and then sand off all that weld detail and try and worry about, you know, replacing that weld detail, because that's some pretty fine, it's like, you know, torch cut mark, and that's kind of hard to duplicate. I mean, I can do it, but I just, man, I don't want to have to, but I may have to, I don't know. But anyway, just wanted to fill you in on that little bit, and it's just an example of stuff that you have to look for when building dragon kits. You know, I hate to bring these kind of things up, but honestly, I've never had that kind of a problem with a Tamiya kit or an Academy kit, because that's predominantly what I build as far as armor. But with Dragon, not only with this kit, but a few other kits, I have had the same situation where numbers don't match, and I think it stems from Dragon's use of multiple different kits sprues to make a kit. I mean, there is tons of parts left over, and I don't know if it saves them money or what, but it can be a little frustrating. And again, you know, it's not something that is insurmountable. You know, it's not something that can't be handled, but it does add a little element of frustration when you're trying to build this stuff. But, you know, it's all part of it. Again, no big deal. It can be handled one way or another. But just wanted to bring that to your attention in case you ever build this kit, you will know what to look for. Alright, so I'm going to work some more on this and come back in a little while, take a look, see what I've come up with. Alright, so back to this plate in the front. Let's see, where'd it go? Part number C8, which is this lower front hull armor plate. Now it has weld detail on it, and so you want it to fit nice and flush. So when I initially put it on, there was a gap between the hull and the weld detail, so that dog wasn't going to hunt, as I said earlier. So what I did is I checked the back here, and there were two ejector pin marks that were pretty pronounced, and they were protruding as opposed to recessed. So I just took my rounded edge blade here, and as I do for getting into tight areas, I scraped it down, and I scraped it until I was fairly certain that the protruding ejector pin mark was removed. Okay, so that was step one. Once I got that done, I test fitted again, and it still was a little bit of a gap. So again, that wasn't going to work. So just knowing the nature of plastic parts and how they kind of work or don't work sometimes, I did a few things. Number one, around this edge, it looked like there was a little bit of a chamfer, like a little small, just barely a bit of radius right in here. So I took my blade and I placed it in the corner, and keeping it almost flat but not quite, just scraped, making sure I had a good point on my blade, just scraped to make sure that there was nothing, that little radius was scraped as square as possible. Okay, so there wouldn't be anything to keep this part from resting in there as it should. So once I did that, then I took a nice sharp blade, and keeping it again almost perfectly flat, almost flat, but just enough to take this edge down a little bit, I scraped scraped it down a little bit, and then taking this blade again, scraping the inside of this to make sure there was no radius inside of here. So I scraped that. So in essence, I was creating angles to where all of the pressure should, if it's done right, rest on the outside edge of this piece here that holds the weld detail. Place it on here, and it should sit fairly flat. Okay, now it looks really good, but the last thing I want to do is scrape that inside, just the inside edge, not out here where the weld is going to rest. I just want to do it on the inside. Scrape some of that material off, and it's easy to make sure you're not taking too much material off, because as you can see, this plastic's a little bit shiny, and as you scrape it off, it dulls it up, so you can still see a shiny edge right along the edge here, but this part in here is dull where I've scraped it. So same thing on this side, because sometimes on edges of parts that are molded, it won't be perfectly, it won't be a perfect 90-degree angle. It might be, now this is going to be exaggerated because this is an illustration, but it might stick up like that from the molding process. So you need to make this into a 90-degree angle. So by scraping that edge, it'll knock it off. So after I did all that, my weld seams fit totally flush with the edges of the hull here. Okay, so I've created a nice snug fit, and even made the bottom fit a little bit better. So now whenever I glue it and I apply some pressure, just an ever so slight amount of the cement will kind of leach out in here and kind of melt this together, so it will actually look like a weld seam. Now underneath here like this, it's probably not as big a deal as it would be on an upper surface, but it's, you know, for me it's good practice to do that, to make sure I get a nice clean, because there's nothing worse than having a weld and having a big gap on the part that is supposed to be welded to. So that's just a little quick you know, one of my tips of the day kind of thing. So I'm going to carry on, work some more on this, and come back. Alright, so I got the plate on here, and as I mentioned, I wanted to make sure that it looked like a weld and not a weld hovering above a plate. And let's see, hopefully you can see that I accomplished that. So with that done, I attached the front, the transmission housing and cover, whatever you want to call it, attached the tow hooks, got all that finished. So that pretty much finished up the lower hull. So then I went back to the upper plate, and here's what I did. I used some really thin strip styrene, or I made some strips out of some styrene sheet, and put them on each side here. Then I did a test fit and saw that it filled the gap, but it was just slightly too thick, and that was evident down here where these parts come together, because they're supposed to come flat together, and there was a gap. So that wasn't going to work, and that could have caused fit problems later. So what I did is, using my handy dandy knife again, I just scraped again at an angle to where I didn't take any material off this outside edge, and just scraped full length like that till it was the appropriate thickness that I was able to check down here. So as you can see, here and here it sits flush like it's supposed to. The top It's fairly decent. There's a little bit of a gap, but in this case there are two parts that fit over that, so that won't be an issue. There's some strips that go across that top part there, so that's not going to be an issue. So the next part was to adjust the width from here to here to make sure they didn't overlap the sides of the side plate, or at least not anything noticeable. So what I did is I used some sandpaper, and I just maintaining the angle as close as I could, I just kept sanding away till I had the appropriate width here so it didn't stick out too far. Now it might be just, no, but it looks pretty good. That's pretty good. So, and it's super flush. So then I had to replace that kind of torch cut look on the edges. So all I did was I took, let me find it here, this square file, and all I did was just at the angle that this angle is here, I just dragged it over and over and over and over and over, all the way up and down till I had a nice rough torch cut plate. So that's how I overcame that problem. So with that, I'm going to glue this into place and then start assembling more of the upper deck portions since the lower is complete. Alright, the front plate has been installed, and as you can see, a whole lot more. It all fit together nicely, no problems. I also attached the tow hooks and the little keepers for that. Photo etch here, photo etch part there, which I have no idea what it is. The machine gun slash flame projector mount and the flame projector. The front driver's hatch. The photo etch that goes over the engine. Got that all installed. These louvers here, got those all installed. This hatch, and then I skipped ahead and went ahead and attached the back plate because I needed to make sure that the this engine cover here fit properly, because I had to do a little bit of shimming, or not shimming, but trimming. The size of this photo etch here interferes with the inside edge of this. It's pretty thick, so I had using my blade. There it is. I did the same thing, scraped at an angle till it cleared in the front and on the sides until it cleared. Otherwise, it wouldn't have sit flush. And then I also had to, this had some weird little humped out pieces there that I had to trim off flat just so it would fit snug up against this upper portion of the deck, so it looked like the hinges were actually attached to something and not floating in midair. So that's something to watch for. And that brings me to a point. There's a lot of parts in this kit that are just slightly too large to fit where they're supposed to be. This is one of them. This hatch right here, I had to sand all the way around just to get it to fit in there, and it was a super snug fit even after I trimmed it up. So, you know, that's something to look for. A quick look at the instructions. I've been making notes on the instructions for some things that need to be watched for. Let's see. These two parts here, H3 and H4, there is a little ridge inside of the opening where it goes, and there is a corresponding notch in the bottom of this part. Well, these part numbers are flip-flop. This one should be H4, this one should be H3. Not too hard to figure out because it'll only fit one way. These parts here, no problems with that. This box here, B17, this is it assembled. Now, if you were to assemble that and stick it in place, groovy. However, you might be dismayed to discover later on that a corresponding box on the opposite side of the hole, which is C11, it shows you the options of mounting photo etch parts on it. So why they showed it on that one and not this one is beyond me, because there are enough photo etch parts for both boxes. So, you know, this is one of those cases where it's a good idea to skip ahead and look at your instructions so you know, so you get stuff put where it needs to be. And if you have options, you want to be able to do them. So, yeah, so I'm glad I didn't glue that into place, because it would be pretty much impossible to be able to put those on there. So, you know, that's something to look at and watch for. Another item that needs notation is this part right here, which are these, there's a couple of toe clevises and a retaining bit of hardware that holds it in place. Now, in looking at this piece right here, it shows B7. Well, B7 is actually only the very top part. There's a pin that should be cemented to that part to reach through to contact here, you know, like a bolt retaining pin kind of thing that holds those shackles into place. So I looked around on the instructions, and the only part I found that was even close was part A10, which is just, it's a small little pin with a little protrusion on the end that fits perfectly into the bottom of B7 and is the exact correct length to fit in there. So that's something else to look for. That pin is not pre-attached, so that's just one of those things that you just, you know, you gotta watch on these dragging instructions, because, you know, you hear stories, or I've heard stories about how bad they are, and, you know, sometimes some things are kind of weird, but this kit has had a few different things, and then the fit issues. So really test fit stuff, and that's why I've been going ahead and, you know, this part here, making sure that this part and that part, you know, parts that interact together, it may be a couple of steps down the, you know, down the instructions, but you want to check it out and make sure that it's going to fit properly before you commit with the first part. So that was just a quick update on that. So I'm going to continue on working on this stuff and come back. And I almost forgot, one more flip-flopped part number situation are the covers for the driver's vision slits. Those numbers are also backwards. So you'll want to make sure, if you put them in incorrectly, this part of the hinge will rest on top of that part of the hinge and will give you a large gap. So you know you've got it right if it sits flush and everything's all interlocked. So just another thing to look for. Alright, so here's the wrap up of this video. I've got all of the parts done on this side of the upper hull, and I have attached the upper hull to the lower hull. And I went ahead and put this on. It doesn't call for this till a later step, but I went ahead and put that on to make sure it fit, and it fits pretty nice. So that is that. Other than that, it all thus far okay, except for those few little things I noted that were easily fixed. So this part here, the engine cover, I may have mentioned it earlier, but I'm not going to actually install that until after I prime the vehicle with a black primer. That way when I put it on, you won't see brass shining through the screen. So anyway, that's it for this video of the T34 for the Joe's T34 group build. So if you have any questions or comments or want to hassle me or anything like that, feel free to do so in the comment section below. And that is it for now, so I will see you all next time on Plastic Models by a Regular Dude.